Hey guys, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, we're putting this 1984 60 Series Land Cruiser onto a Range Rover Classic chassis. In the last few videos, the cab has been on the chassis, but we haven't gone through mounting it. So that's what we're going to go through today. I've got a pair of mounts done on the chassis, and then I've put the cab on, squared it up, got it right, and that's all I've done, because then I wanted to go through and start on my suspension so I could make sure I didn't need to move it and it didn't like rub on anything or do anything weird. Now that I'm happy with the position, we can go through and finalize all the cab mounts so I can bolt the cab down and we can ensure that that's where it's going to be. So last episode we went through the different parts of suspension and how they all sort of work together to create, a complete package. So today we're going to go through mounting the cab and then how I've gone about measuring all this up to make sure it all sort of works in place. So when I first drew everything up on CAD, all the chassis bracing and engine mounts and suspension and stuff, I sort of worked out roughly where I thought the cab should go. So I drew up some mounts and I cut them out, welded them up and tacked them to the chassis, and they're actually on the chassis under here. There's just two, one on each side, and then I've got a steel block there to simulate a body rubber. And that was just to help me put the cab on. I had a mate come around, Tim, and he helped me plonk it on. And then we worked out after fitting it that there was a few clearance issues, with tires and the cab and the chassis and a few things. So I've actually moved it up a little bit and I think slightly back. So I've then had to go through and cut some more. So I've cut 3 new pairs of body mounts. The 60 cab actually has 6 pairs. So there's 3 between the wheel arches, and then there's 1 on the front here, and there's 2 behind the back because the rear quarter is actually quite long on these. So I'm just doing the center 3 for now because these posts I've got welded on, they're actually in the way of where this body mount would go. You can see that's the old bolt and he's there. So once I can get this off, I can do the last body mounts. So for those who aren't familiar, the bodies are rubber mounted to the chassis, and that sort of insulates the cab from vibration and noise that you would sort of feel otherwise. Even if the suspension might be really good, there's always going to be some feedback coming through the chassis. So this is a 60 series body mount. It's very solid rubber, like I can hardly compress it. And the cab would sit on top here. The chassis sits in the middle, and then there's a crush tube you can kind of see in there. And that way when the chassis goes up or down, or the cab goes up and down, it squishes this rubber, or then if it needs to go up, it'll squish this rubber, and that way it's sort of insulated both ways. This is a 200 series body rubber. It works in the exact same way. You can see it's got a crush tube, a top and bottom bush. And the difference is there's obviously a lot more rubber, and this is really soft. I can actually squish it. So it's much better at insulating the cab from the chassis from road vibrations and noise, which is why a lot of new cars ride a lot better and a lot more quiet. So I'm going to mount these on my chassis and bolt them up to my cab instead of these. And that way, hopefully we'll get a nicer ride rather than using the 60 body rubbers, which are basically solid plastic blocks nearly. Now, because these are so soft and move around so much and they're also hard to get, I've only got 2 of them. My mate Matt machined up these. So these are essentially the top half of that. So that way I can make sure that when I put all the body mounts on the chassis and I put these solid steel blocks in place and I bolt the cab to it, it's 100% in place. It's not going to deflect, if the mount's 5 mil too long or something, the rubber will just let it squish over there, and then I feel like the body mounts would all sort of prematurely wear out, and it also might load the bush a bit, where then it's going to transfer more vibration through the chassis into the cab because the rubber's all sort of tensed up rather than free to move left and right as much as it wants. So I've just got to weld these mounts together, then I can substitute those ones for the new ones that I've got here and add 2 more, and then I can get rid of these little packers I've got at the front and the back here. Then the cab is bolted down fully, and then we can get back into the suspension. So I just finished getting all these body mounts all welded up, so they're ready to roll now. So I can go through, and because the cab's already in the right spot, I can put the body mount on that went onto this bolt here, and then there's one at the back just before the rear wheel arch. Then I can cut out this one on both sides and replace it with this other new one that's slightly different. You can see there's a bit of a gap there, sort of stopping it reaching the body, if you can see that. So the only difference with this one is it needs to go up a little bit. So I just made a new one up that's a bit higher. So I'll get them on, and then once I get them sort of tacked in place and the body has like a nice home to go to, I'll rip the body off, we'll move that motor over 20 mil. Hopefully we can fit that AC compressor. And then while the body's off, we'll start putting the shock towers in. So I got all those body mounts bolted up except for the center two because I got to cut those old ones off. I just gave it a quick few measurements and checked my old marks that I had marked it on the chassis and the cab to make sure it was still aligned. And it had actually moved a little bit at the front here because I've been hacking up this with the grinder and cutting it all and doing whatever for tyre fitment, which must have meant, you know, what was vibrating around from using the grinder and stuff on it, it actually had shuffled over a little bit. So I brought it back in line, now it's all squared up again. So now I'm just gonna go through and tack these body mounts on, and then the cab is stuck in place. So that wasn't real fun, but I got the old mounts off, so I'll just throw the other ones on now, tack them in, and then we'll rip this cab off. So this bolt's just stripped on the under the seat here. So I've got one of these twist sockets. I don't know if you can see that, if it'll focus, but these will get anything. This is a Worth branded ones. There's other brands too, but it's basically just a spiral of sharp teeth, and they're sized to suit what the socket head used to be. And you just tap it on. And then go find your rattle gun. Look at that, straight out. It'll be now stuck in there, but I'll have to go get a punch and knock this bolt head back out. But that's rock solid. Really good things to have. All right, so we've got 6 of our 12 body mounts now tacked to the chassis. One there, one there, one there, and then we've got 2 to go just at the back here, and then one up the front in front of the steering box for the radiator support once I get rid of this pipe. So the other thing I want to do while I've got the cab off is move this engine. The AC compressor goes here and was just hitting on this. I just want to shuffle the motor over about 20 mil. That would also give us a little bit more room here from our handbrake disc conversion from Boosted and Built Garage. Carl sent me this to put on the back of the Cruiser transfer. But you can see also there's probably only about 20 mil there. So just to move it over, this shaft will straighten up a little bit too. So I've just got 4 new plates here, which are just new ones of these. So 2 longer ones and then 2 shorter ones for the other side. And I've also got another cross member to suit here as well, which I've also folded up and clearance to suit the transfer where it's rubbing at the moment. So I'm just going to lift the motor out, plonk in that new transfer, tack these new little 2 brackets onto the chassis there, drop the motor back in, make sure that's all sweet. Then I can get onto the shock stuff. So motor's out, that was pretty easy with a forklift. I've got to change this cross member. It was hitting the transfer just at the back here, and these holes need to move over a little bit and slightly forward too, actually. I got that slightly wrong. So I've made another one, it's just here. It's already folded. There's a cutout here for where the transfer was rubbing, and these holes are over 20 mil and forward whatever it was that I needed to make them line up nice, because the studs weren't in the center for the gearbox mounts. And then they go onto this thing. This welds on, but it's just the access holes for these studs here. And then I've got to just cut the tacks on these things, take these off. These are all just tacked together luckily. And then we've got the new ones here, which will replace them. I'm not sure which one's which. That's probably a short side. And then we've got the long side as well. So I'll just quickly throw that in, cut and tack them back on in the new situation. And we can throw this back in. Hey guys, so I had a bit of an SD card error, but I got the motor remounted, moved it over a little bit. The AC compressor does fit, although the pulley is very close to the steering box. So I don't think it's gonna work, but I had a look at an LS3 and the compressor is different, and this pulley actually looks a bit smaller, so hopefully it does work. Worst case, being an LS, there's about 1,000 variants of where you can mount all the different accessories. You know, I can move it over here and move the alternator up, or I can put it up here, wherever. So plenty of options, so it's not too big a deal. Now that I've got that sort of sorted and we've got the cab on, the next step is to start doing all our shocks and suspension stuff. So while I had the cab on, I worked out roughly where maximum up travel is, because that's sort of the first step to doing that. So you can see I've got some little packers here for the rear diff to stop it going up too far. And then on the front here, I've got these little bolts to sort of limit up travel. And that's sort of the determining factor for it. Basically what I did was I jacked the diffs up as far as I could get them to go until they started sort of hitting, you know, the motor and chassis and all that sort of stuff. And then I went down a little bit so nothing was hitting. I packed it out so that it had like a stop. Then I flexed it out so the other side went down 12 inches, the length of my shocks, to simulate flexing. And that way I could see roughly how the wheel would fit in the guard when the body was on here and see what the issues would be. That ended up making me move the cab a little bit back so it fitted in the rear wheel arch a little bit better, and I ended up having to pack the diffs down a little bit more until we got to a point where I'd still had plenty of up travel, but when the wheels would tuck, they wouldn't require too much cutting because I didn't want to ruin the cab shape too much. So now that we've got it set and I've got these little stoppers set up, the next step is to work out where our shocks go. So I've already done that. I've got a whole bunch of parts here cut out with some bump stops and stuff, which we'll go through. And this afternoon's job is to put the lower shock mounts on here, work out our top shock towers and get all the front shocks in, and then we can go on to doing the rear. But the rear I'll have to pull the diff out and brace it all up first because I've got this big truss on here, which sort of has to happen to put the shocks onto. But we'll go through that when we get to it. Let's get into it, eh? All right, so I got all my bits prepped.
Got this little pile of parts and bolts here for all the shock mounts. I've got a little drawing here from the computer, just some fold dimensions and sort of what we're going for afterwards. And then I've got my knuckle gusset tacked on there, ready to go. And then these bits are sort of like a big jigsaw puzzle, and they all sort of will clip onto there, like that. 1 and 2. And then the shock will mount up on here and down in here. So then it's just a matter of getting these bits, spacing them correctly to suit the shock opening, and tacking them all onto here to make it sort of like one big thing. So I'll go through and get them all on there now. I'll do the other side as well, and then we can go and put the top mount on. All right, so I just got the bottom corner mount done here. So we've got 2 shock mounts, one for the coilover, one for the bypass. Both have holes in the bottom so mud can come out, that any mud that builds up in there. And they tie in nicely to this knuckle bore gusset that runs right through to underneath. So you'll notice I've been trying to tack everything on just in case I've got to change it, because obviously if you fully weld it, you'll probably definitely have to change it, and it's way harder to take off. But I do weld what I need to if I'm going to put a bracket over the top of it, because I won't be able to get in there and weld it well next time. So that's why the knuckle bore gusset is fully welded, because we know that's, you know, that's where it's got to go. They're all the same. But the bracket on top, I'll just tack it until I get the top mounts in, just to cycle it or make sure I didn't get anything wrong. And that way, if I do need to move it, it's still a bit of a headache, but it's a lot easier than cutting it all off and starting from scratch. So now I'll put the coilover in, and we'll get this tower sitting on top and see how it fits. All right, so I just got this first tower sort of clamped in place. I had to do a little bit of cleaning up to get it to fit nice, but you can see it's in there roughly where it needs to go. Mounts to the back of the engine mount there, if you can see that in the shadow. Should get some better lights. Coilover sitting in there nicely. There is the cutout here for the steering column. which doesn't quite fit. I'll have to pull it off and clean it up a little bit more. If I put that down in there, you can see it's going to rub. So I just got to take a little bit more out of the back of that, and then I'll be able to sort of clamp that in place, and then we can look at heights and putting this top mount in. Might need to bring it down a little bit, just cut a bit out of the base. But first I'll get that steering column thing working, and then we'll tweak that a bit. All right, so I just got this tower tacked on. So that is 1/8 of the shocks done. Oh, well, I've got half of this shock done too. So it's like, I don't know, 1/8, 3/16 of the shock mount's done. And all the other stuff's cut, so we're probably a little bit further along, but that'll make the other side a lot quicker because I've already done all the measurements now and everything's all sweet. So now we'll just set the laser up so I can get this in the same spot on the other side, do these two lower mounts on the other side, and that's the front finished. The top bypass mount, so there's obviously where the bypass will go, he doesn't exist yet because normally I would do a tower that is wider and both shocks would fit inside here, but because of this, I've actually made a smaller tower so that I can have a proper intact full shock tower. The bypass is going to come up the front, and I'm going to do sort of like a box off the side here that is then also the piece that goes across to the other side of the engine. So that way it'll still be strong, but I can actually have a full, you know, braced piece down here, because for it to get to here, the steering box was here and I'd lose all the material. I didn't want to bring it out too far because then it's in the way of like the wheel and everything. Couldn't go back behind it obviously because our motor's already in the way as it is. So that's what I've come up with. A normal shock tower with a bypass hanging off the front that'll all be boxed in and should still look nice, and that'll then go over to the other side. Whereas the back is just a wide tower with both shocks just in the middle. All right, the other thing is we're at full bump here according to our little bolt stopper, and we have a little bit of shaft showing still. So that there is probably like 10 or 15 mil, and that's just enough to sort of allow it to pivot on the bump stop and come up and not bottom out the shock too hard. All right, so I just took some measurements. I've now got it set up at full droop, just to check clearances with the steering box and stuff in there. I've got a couple of measurements written down here, so I'm just gonna go jump on the computer, draw up a little top hat, get that cut out, clean it up, tack it on, and then we should have the top of this shock mounted, and then we can go ahead and do the other side, sort of mirror image. But this side is the side I wanted to do first because the steering box makes this side tricky. The other side is easy. Once you've got this side, you just copy it, right? So I've just drawn up the bypass mount to go on the side of the coilover tower. I've got to add one more piece in here that'll box this in once I check that this actually works. I don't want to cut too much and find out it's completely wrong, but that should tie into the tower nicely, still allow full access to all the bypass tube adjustment. And then when we have to go across from the top of the motor, we can come from up here and go up and over to the other side of the motor. So I'll get these 3 parts cut out and folded now, and then we'll tack them on and check they work, and then we can make up this little infill panel to box out in here so it doesn't twist. So I'm just nesting the parts. If you guys haven't seen this before, we basically tell it the size of the sheet we've got to work with, and then let it do its thing, and it works out the best way to fit everything in, to use sort of the least amount of material and have the most waste. And now we're out here at the plasma, and we just sent the job across. So there's our parts, and then we've got to zero the machine. All right, I just got these off the machine. So when you cut it with a plasma or anything, it leaves this little bit of slag, and you have to clean that up before you can obviously put in the folder or anything. And then also what you want to do when you cut something like this is you also want to clean up this edge a little bit, just with a flappy disc like this. It just takes off a layer of like hardened steel that the plasma creates all the way around the edge, and it's easier to weld and you get a better weld quality that way. Otherwise it's kind of like welding through like almost like oil or paint, like it makes a bit of porosity if you don't clean it up right. So I'll just give these a quick hit with the flappy, get this tiny bit of slag off, clean up them edges, put a fold in a couple of these. We've got our bit of drawing here with our fold dimensions, whack a few folds in them, and we'll go and put them in the car. All right, so I got that corner done. Both shocks are on. I cycled it, it all works really good. No clearance issues. The tight fit that I was worried about was this piggyback res and this steering box here, but it ended up working out pretty good. So that fits. So now I'll just bang out the other side. I've got all the pieces cut already and folded, so basically just a mirror image of the top and bottom of that. It'll be a lot quicker because I've already done one, I know my measurements are right, and I don't have to mess around with the steering column or anything like that. I can just get in and get it done. So that's all for tonight, I think. Next episode, we're gonna get the rear shocks done. We're gonna pull the diff out, brace it, go through bracing and straightening of housings and stuff like that. So make sure you subscribe so you can see when that drops, because that should be pretty interesting, I reckon. Otherwise, thanks for watching.